The Legend of Jimmy Spoon by Kristiana Gregory, Chapter 16, Lost. The camp was in an uproar. It seemed that everyone ran around and talked at the same time. It reminded Jimmy of Brigham Young's fort when he was just 8, and how the settlers were in constant fear of Indian attacks. The sounds of children crying and of mothers hushing them were the same. The sounds of men shouting instructions were the same. Jimmy closed his eyes. The sounds of horses pacing and snorting were the same. The smell of dust in the air, the feeling of fear, it was all the same. Warriors were smearing black paint made of charcoal and bear grease on their foreheads and around their eyes. Jimmy watched as they mixed a palmful of grease with pollen and dried berries to draw yellow and red stripes on their cheeks. The boys rounded up the fastest horses and took them among the teepees to await riders. Washakie sat high in his saddle, from which dangled stirrups of soft beaded leather. His war bonnet had 2 trails of feathers flowing down his back, and the brow band was beaded with dark blue and white triangles. His grayish hair spread over his shoulders. Like a magnificent mane, his lance pointed toward the clouds. Chief Washakie gave one yell and raised his staff. With a slight press of his moccasins, his horse bolted forward, flanked by ready warriors. Jimmy raced to where Pinto Bean and Red were staked. Old Mother hurried after him. "They need me," Jimmy called back to her. "I've got to help fight." "I will tell you when to fight," she said, catching him up. "You stay by me. It would take you 5 suns on your pony to get a crow," she said, hoping to discourage him. She lifted his hand and pressed it against her heart. "Dawi, you have scared me too many times." With the warriors gone, the camp was quiet. Children played along the river, and a group of boys on horseback chased antelope. The next morning, Mozo rode with Jimmy into the forested foothills to hunt elk. After 2 hours, they saw a small herd in a clearing, grazing on the yellow flowers of the bitter bush. The old man motioned to Jimmy, and they slid to the soft pine-scented ground where they lay on their bellies. Mozo drew an arrow and pulled his arm back. A large crow elk jerked sideways when the arrow hit, ran a few yards, then fell. A large cow elk, sorry. "Shoot her in the neck, Dawi," he said. "Then slit her throat to bleed her and wait until I return." Before Jimmy could protest, Mozo crept after a buck that was headed toward a canyon. Why did Mozo have to leave? Jimmy was already nervous from the war preparations of the day before, and now Mozo had left him alone. What if the crow decided to sneak up? Jimmy stepped cautiously toward the fallen cow. He'd heard stories about wounded animals playing dead and then attacking the approaching hunter. Jimmy wasn't taking any chances. He fired his own 8 arrows into her, plus a dozen more Gamu had given him. The elk didn't move. Jimmy threw sticks at it. He sat against a rock and waited. Much later, when it still hadn't moved, he felt it was safe to check on the huge animal. He pulled his knife from his belt and drew it across the elk's throat. Not a drop of blood came out. Jimmy had waited too long. Now the animal would rot quickly, lying on the moist ground. Jimmy looked about for Mozo. He called, he whistled. He didn't quite remember the way back to camp, but he started walking anyway. Moss grew on the north side of logs, he knew that. He looked up at the sky. He knew the tips of fir trees leaned south toward the sun, and that the branches were more numerous facing south. But whether camp was south or west or north or east, he could not remember. Mozo had told him to memorize their trail, but Jimmy, uneasy about Washakie being at war, hadn't paid attention. As he wandered, he grew more and more frightened. The horses weren't where he'd thought they were. And when he retraced his steps, the dead elk was gone. There was a stream where he hadn't seen one before. "Mozo!" he cried. Louder this time. "Mozo!" He whistled and whistled, hoping Pinto Bean would hear. Jimmy sat down on a rock. He rested his chin on his knees and closed his eyes in despair. Wazip, he was lost. The more Jimmy realized how alone he was, the more worried he became. What has happened to Mozo, he wondered. Could he have been ambushed? Is he hurt? Jimmy didn't know how to begin searching for the elder. Besides, he was hungry. It was getting cold. His moccasins were damp, and somehow he'd ripped his shirt. A mountain lion could come after him, or a bear, or 3 bears. In a flash, he climbed a tree, clinging nervously to a thick branch oozing with sap. He might be sticky, but at least the bears couldn't get him, he thought with relief. Jimmy had forgotten how much young bears and mountain lions enjoy climbing trees. Hours passed. A crescent moon rose in the black sky. An owl hooted, another answered. Jimmy shivered with cold. Every rustle sounded like a grizzly coming near. He listened to crickets chirping and felt sure that enemy crow were signaling one another. The owls began hooting with more frequency. The sounds of the forest grew louder as the minutes passed. Suddenly a line of horses trampled nearby, and Jimmy's heart pounded in his throat. Crow! He was close to panic, but a familiar voice cried out, Dawi! Jimmy opened his mouth to yell, but his tongue was so dry no sound came. Dawi! The voice called again in the darkness. Soon, the brush below the tree crackled, and Jimmy saw the dim form of Washaki. I'm up here, Jimmy whispered. Why are you up there? Jimmy was shivering so much it was hard to talk. I can't find my horse, he managed. Your horse is not up there. I know. Come down, Dawi. The whole tribe is searching for you. Old Mother is crazy with worry. It would be better for us if some Indian would kill you so we could get some sleep. I have a thought to do it myself. Jimmy rode beside Washaki, his arms around the chief's waist, his face against his back. Drinking in the comforting smoky smell from Washaki's buckskin shirt, he was happy the chief had returned safely from the crow skirmish and relieved that he soon would be home. When they reached the clearing, Washaki hallooed to let everyone know Dawi was safe. Indians yelled back from the timber. Old Mother ran from her teepee, scolding and crying when she saw Jimmy. You did not listen to Mozo. I thought a big bear ate you. He just said to wait. He didn't say for how long, Jimmy said. Aye! She waved her hand in front of her. In the firelight, Jimmy saw the years in her face. He told you to wait. You did not wait. When he returned for you, you had already made plans of your own. Wazip! You have lived so long that you know more than your elders? The next morning, Jimmy and Mozo returned for the elk, even though it had begun to rot. Jimmy brought it to Old Mother and proudly showed it off. I'll make you moccasins from the hide, Old Mother. You are a good son, Dawi, but the skin is spoiled. It'll wash out good. I can do it. Yes, little hunter, I know you can. But how will you fill those holes from your 20 arrows? And that is the end of chapter 16.